Joining me now is former prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. She famously helped prosecute the case against Bill Cosby. MSNBC legal analyst and former prosecutor Christy Greenberg prosecuted sex crimes as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And NBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin is with me here on set. Let's talk about the charges, and I think related to the depth of them is that we just learned the defense is proposing a $50 million bond in an attempt to get their client released.
Well, I think the fact that they're proposing a $50 million bond speaks to how serious the charges against Sean Combs are. So let's go through them from top to bottom. The first is a racketeering conspiracy charge. And I'm sure when some of our viewers hear that, their eyes glaze over. But essentially what that means is that Sean Combs built an enterprise consisting of his businesses, but also of personal employees and people loyal to him to help him basically accomplish these sex crimes with which he has been charged. And not only did they help him accomplish these sex crimes, they did a bunch of other criming with him, according to prosecutors, in order to cover it up or to keep his victims silent. He's also been charged, Chris, with sex trafficking under force or coercion or transportation with the intent to engage in prostitution. And critical to the allegations are the severity of the violence alleged: use of guns, forced drugging, arson, and kidnapping, all alleged and suffused throughout not only this indictment, but the detention letter that prosecutors sent to the judge today, where they outline in 16 pages why Sean Combs should not be released from federal custody prior to his trial. That's why you see Sean Combs and his lawyers saying, hey, we'll put up a $50 million bond package consisting of a $48 million home that I own outright and other things.
So, Kristen, I want to play some of what we heard earlier from prosecutors.
This office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
So to me, honestly, Kristen, that sounds pretty straightforward. But then I read the indictment. And the level of depravity that's just alleged there, that's described there, it's certainly nothing I've ever seen, but you have the experience. Put it into context for us.
Yeah, so what happens is, and I think one of the things that's interesting, Chris, and he was actually asked this at the press conference about, okay, if you have this indictment that outlines this depravity, how is it that just a year prior you give him the key? How is it that we didn't know that any of this was going on? And one of the things that I think is really important is that throughout the pre-detention letter that Lisa was alluding to, they talked to, I think they said they gave around 300 grand jury subpoenas, spoke to around 50 victims and witnesses who are able to really substantiate or corroborate one another with the allegations that are set forth in this indictment. So I think one of the things is, well, then how did this go on so long? But you have to remember that sexual assault, particularly when it's against someone as powerful as Puff Daddy, particularly when you have the facilitation of some type of intoxicants, you're talking about ketamine and all of those drug-fueled parties, and then you go up against someone whose reputation is such that he was awarded the key to the city, you have a very large power imbalance, which further levels onto that coercion and further forces victims to be silenced. So that level of depravity, even though it's so horrific, can really cause it to be silenced when you have someone as powerful as Puff Daddy.
Yeah, Christy, to be honest with you, again, when I read through it, it was like, how did this go on for so long, again, allegedly? And no one spoke up, or, I mean, there have been other cases in the past related to him, but let me ask you what you, as someone who has prosecuted sex crimes at the SDNY, what stands out to you in the indictment?
So one thing I would say in prosecuting sex trafficking cases, oftentimes they are undetected for decades, like this one. I unfortunately have prosecuted sex trafficking cases that have gone on for decades. And a lot of the reasons why the victims don't say anything earlier are, even when the facts are different across cases, the ultimate reasons tend to be the same, because these traffickers know that they can instill a culture of fear. And that culture of fear really prevents them from speaking up. Here you had force, you had violence, you had U.S. Attorney Damian Williams saying that these victims felt they could not leave because their own security was at risk if they did. And there is actual video evidence of that when one of the victims was trying to leave a hotel room, trying to leave one of those freak-offs. And what happened? Sean Combs violently beat her. That is on tape. So to the extent any juror, any member of the public questions, well, why didn't she leave? You can see the evidence of why she didn't leave sooner. It's right there on tape. I will say that in terms of looking at this indictment and looking at the detention letter that was submitted by the prosecutors here, this is among the strongest sex trafficking cases I have seen, because you have the conduct on tape. These freak-offs are on tape, found in videos, in Sean Combs' own personal devices. You have recorded calls where he is then trying to have them and engage in a false narrative to conceal his the evidence of the crime once it was determined that the law enforcement officials were looking into this. That evidence is damning. In addition to having the victims coming forward and corroborating one another's accounts, the fact that you have video evidence they can see and hear Mr. Combs threatening and hurting victims, I mean, this case really seems incredibly strong.
So given that, given the details, given the strength of the case that the prosecutors say they have, Lisa, what will the judge consider if they offer this $50 million so he can be free while this case is going to trial?
Well, you know, as Christy and Kristen know well, the dangerousness of the individual to the community, as well as the likelihood that they will and have the capacity to flee, are two factors that a judge considers. One of the things that Sean Combs' lawyers have told the judge is acknowledging that he owns a plane. They say that there's a letter of intent to sell that plane, and as part of that, he won't take the plane right now. But where you have a defendant who owns private aviation, the capacity to flee is there. The other thing is that the dangerousness of Sean Combs should not be underscored. In addition to the allegations of literally hitting, dragging, kicking his victims. I'm reading from the detention letter now. There's an incident where he and a co-conspirator kidnapped an individual at gunpoint to facilitate breaking and entering into the residence of another. Approximately 2 weeks later, according to prosecutors, co-conspirators then set fire to that individual's vehicle, and that multiple witnesses would testify to the defendant, meaning Sean Combs, bragging about his role in destroying individual one's car. This is not a white-collar defendant who has committed alleged securities fraud. This is a person who is a danger to the community and a danger to women, according to the Southern District of New York, Chris.
So we have less than a minute, but let me ask you, Kristen, what happens today? What happens next?
So today the judge will most likely determine whether or not he will detain Puff Daddy or whether he will allow him to remain on the streets, as we say, with certain bail conditions intact. He's either going to put him right to jail or he's going to say, hey, you got to sell that plane. You've got to surrender your passport. There may be certain things in place, such as electronic monitoring or anything along those lines. But I think that there is a strong case for him to be detained throughout the pendency of these criminal proceedings.
And we will have our crew write what you see on your screen, where you see on your screen outside that courthouse at 2:30 when it's all set to begin. Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, Christy Greenberg, Lisa Rubin, thank you all.